A service has been held at Westminster Abbey to remember the 72 people who died in the Grenfell Tower fire in West London 5 years ago today. Church leaders described the loss and the anguish suffered as still vivid and sharp. Other events to mark the anniversary have included a 72-second silence and a multi-faith service at the foot of Grenfell Tower itself. We begin our coverage with this from Tom Simons.
Today, a scattered community returned to the foot of their tower. Along with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, in several events, they remembered the loss of 72 lives. Even 5 years on, survivors ask, how can this have happened? Whole families lost, like the El Wahhabis. Abdulaziz El Wahhabi was on the phone to his sister, who escaped until the last minute.
He wanted me to reassure his son that it was going to be okay. So I said, yes, it's going to be okay. And that's something I've got to live with, because I told him it was going to be okay and it wasn't.
Hanan Wahhabi speaking there. Well, the names of the Wahhabi children were among those read out earlier as balloons were released, one for each of the 17 children who died in the fire.
Jessica Abano Ramirez, Mehdi El Wahhabi, Noor Huda El Wahhabi, Logan Gomez.
This was a particularly poignant moment at the memorial service earlier. While families continue to grieve for those lost, a public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire is continuing. Phase 1 of the inquiry found that a previous refurbishment of the tower breached building regulations. It heard evidence that plastic material in the cladding was the main reason that the flames spread. As to whether anyone will be prosecuted, well, the Metropolitan Police is looking into offences including manslaughter, corporate manslaughter, misconduct in public office and breaches of fire safety regulations. But it says it will wait until the public inquiry ends before passing any evidence to prosecutors. Well, Yvette Williams is the founder of the community organisation Justice for Grenfell, and this is what she wants to see happen.
Prosecution, seeing somebody in the docks, seeing somebody serving jail for it. That would happen to any ordinary Joe Bloggs if they had committed the fire, so there seems some kind of injustice there. And also just changing things, making real change. There are thousands of people still living up and down the country with combustible cladding on their homes. And we've known that 5 years ago, but they're still there. And if the stuff that has come out of the public inquiry, we cannot see why on earth that isn't just taken down immediately.
Well, earlier this month, the government banned the type of cladding that allowed the fire to spread so quickly at Grenfell from new installations. Since the fire, unsafe cladding has been removed from hundreds of buildings in the UK where it was already installed. But thousands of people still living in around 58 large buildings have that still. Fire safety experts say that the advice given to residents to stay put in the event of a fire also contributed to the loss of life. Ed Galea is from the University of Greenwich.
What stay put's based on is what's known as compartmentation. You try and contain the fire. And yes, that works in the majority of cases. But as Grenfell has shown us, when it fails catastrophically, leading to large loss of life. And so we need to have a backup plan. What happens when the stay put fails? We need an evacuation plan.
Well, Pete Wolfenden is a retired firefighter and he was called to Grenfell on the night of the fire.
Some of the crews, when they were going up inside the block, they were risking their lives from the block. The safety procedures we had in place to go up into high-rise fires, we just threw them out the window. And these people went up, the men and women of the firefighters and the junior officers went up there with all intention of doing the best job they could. In hindsight, would we have done something different? Of course we would. If we knew the lethality of the changes they'd made to that block by putting putting flammable cladding on the outside, extending the windows and putting flammable plastic around the windows. If we knew how lethal that block was going to be, we would have done a different thing straight away. We would have had the stay put policy, and there would have been no firefighting actions, no nothing, just get people out.
One of the firefighters who was first at the scene. My colleague Greg McKenzie has spent the day at Grenfell Tower. Greg, so many poignant moments today as this community, so deeply hurt, remembers, especially when those balloons were released for the children who lost their lives.
Well, that's right, a poignant day for all involved, and many of the survivors here today and the families and those bereaving, really, in terms of what happened here 5 years ago. Now we're just at the foot of the tower. Behind us is a memorial wall where many people have been coming to lay floral tributes. There was a service at Westminster Abbey in central London this morning which started the services today of remembrance, followed by a vigil right here at the foot of the tower in West London. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge attending that event. That was a private event for the families of those 72 people who lost their lives here 5 years ago.
Greg, 5 years ago I was on the very early shift, and as this tragedy, as this disaster was unfolding, I was able to speak to so many people who were searching for loved ones, for relatives, among them all of those children. Now 5 years on, we keep hearing justice for Grenfell. Do people feel that they are any closer to finding that justice?
Well, the simple answer is, from the people I've been speaking, no. We know the public inquiry has gone through the first phase. The second phase of that public inquiry won't probably conclude until the end of 2023. And for many families of those and the survivors, they say they simply want answers. But once the public inquiry concludes at the end of 2023, it will be down to London's Metropolitan Police to decide whether there's enough evidence to bring a criminal prosecution and really hold those to account who were responsible for that cladding that went up on this building over my shoulder.
The cladding, hugely controversial. Also, this order to stay put, this order not to move when the fire was first starting. I wonder, 5 years on, do we know more about any changes when it comes to fires in high-rise buildings?
Well, one of the recommendations was about the stay put policy. That was a highly controversial policy, the stay put policy, which is still in place in terms of what to do should there be a fire in a large tower block or a large building, a public building. And the advice has been from the government is to stay put. But many campaigners for Grenfell United, especially those who had disabled relatives who died in that fire, are quite angry at that advice. Now, that advice really comes from scientists who say that fire doesn't travel through concrete, and therefore you're safer, their advice, if you remain in the property and await the emergency services to evacuate you. That's partly because a lot of these buildings built back in the 50s and the 60s, even the 70s, had single staircases, so one entrance in and one entrance out. So if you have hundreds of people panicking trying to get down a stairwell when the fire brigade are trying to get in to put the fire out, there are problems there. And that is really why the stay put advice has been stayed put. That is what the government is advising people to do. But many people I spoke to here today and many years ago, I was here that morning after the fire, the building was still smoking, and many people were told they were told to stay put, but they simply got out. And for many of them have told me today, had they not, maybe they wouldn't be here today to tell their stories 5 years on.
Greg McKenzie, thank you for sharing the stories of those people. Thank you for being there 5 years on Grenfell Tower. Thank you.